Fred. Thanks for having me. I'm trying to keep warm here in New York. It's freezing. It's snowing, and but everything's good. Thank you.
I know how that is. Now, you are a Temple alum, correct?
T for Temple U, buddy. Yeah, graduated in 2000.
Are you a Philly sports guy or a New York sports guy?
I'm a Philadelphia sports fan. Grew up in Bucks County. Huge Eagles fan. Huge Phillies fan. Huge Sixer fan. I'm a Flyers fan. Not the biggest hockey fan, but I get flyered up. But big Sixers, Phillies, Eagles. Huge Temple basketball fan, and looking forward to some Eagles playoff football.
Very nice. Now, I am a bitter Giants fan, but if there's a team I can't stand more than the Eagles, it's the Cowboys. So before we get into wrestling and all the things you're doing with VH1, bro, no Adrian Peterson, no Toby Gerhart, y'all at 48 points?
Dude.
What happened?
Let me just tell you, the Eagles hurt me in so many ways. Not just because I'm an Eagles fan and I wanted that game because it would have put us 2 up on the Cowboys. I went against a guy in fantasy who picked up Matt Asiata a minute before 1 o'clock. The dude scores 3 touchdowns and 51 yards, and I came this close to not making my fantasy finals. Just out of the grace of God, Justin Tucker did what he did last night, and I made the most improbable comeback victory in my league's long storied history. But I was so mad at the Eagles because I had picked up their defense because I thought, come on, Eagles defense playing great for 5 weeks in a row, playing against Minnesota, round robin of quarterbacks, and they give up 48 points. Who would have thought that the Eagles would get Chip Kelly?
Yeah, man, it was quite a shame because, yes, while I do have some disdain for the Eagles, man, I respect Nick Foles' hustle, and Chip Kelly, I mean, he's done an awesome job this season. Meanwhile, the Cowboys, oof. Well, yeah. Hey, look on the bright side, man. You could always bet against the Cowboys in December. So I think.
Here's the thing: people always ask me, being a Philly fan in New York, and I always tell them I'm not a dick. I'm not a bad Philly fan. I'm like a nice, polite Philly fan. I like my teams, but I don't impress that upon other people. I love football. I just love watching it. And honestly, after last season, I thought Tony Romo had played his last game for the Cowboys. It's amazing that he's still on the team. I think he's a great quarterback, but I just think that it's such a cancerous environment down there. There's no way that team's ever going to win.
Yeah, I mean, especially with Uncle Jerry and the way he's running things. Now, Philly is a great sports town. It's also an awesome pro wrestling city. I happened to be there live for Money in the Bank, and was an experience I'll never forget. Did you grow up a wrestling fan?
I did, man. I dated my wrestling love back to around 1986. First memory that I really have is, me and my brothers were big Saturday Night Live fans, and we turned on Saturday Night Live one night, and it wasn't on. And Saturday Night's Main Event was on, and I caught my first glimpse of Rusty Brooks and Hulk Hogan, and that kind of, planted the seed. And then I always tell the story, WWF Superstars on Saturday morning. I watched Paul Orndorff turn on Hulk Hogan in the tag team match against Studd and Bundy. And that hooked me, man. I was so blown away. Like I just could not fathom that Paul Orndorff would do that to Hulk Hogan. And it upset me so much as a child, and it hooked me, man. I've been a fan ever since. I can't quit wrestling. Even though I want to sometimes, a lot of people go through I watched it when I was a kid. Then I got a little older and I stopped watching it. Then around college, I started watching it again. Like that's the normal sort of chronology there. But I've just always consistently been a wrestling fan, and I don't really ever see it stopping. I'm more of a wrestling fan now than I was as a kid. I mean, I read. That's all I do. If I'm reading a book on a vacation, it's going to be a wrestling biography. I listen to podcasts. I do these shows and podcasts, and I tweet about wrestling. And I just love it, even though the product obviously is not where I'd like it to be.
Yeah, I mean, the product has definitely fallen off the last 4 months. I mean, at SummerSlam, it seems like they were clicking on all cylinders. Daniel Bryan beat John Cena, which made my jaw drop. And then they follow that up with him getting beat up like 7 straight shows by the Shield, by the Authority, having him win the title a couple of times for a cup of coffee, only to lose it or have it be stripped of him. And I don't know, man. It's just been a mess. And I look at Daniel Bryan, and I look at a guy like CM Punk, and Daniel Bryan is physically bigger than CM Punk. Okay, not as tall, but physically bigger. What is the problem with giving Daniel Bryan at least like a 2-3 month reign as champ?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because literally everyone in the company has had a 2-3 month reign as champ. I mean, guys like Jack Swagger have held a title, and Ziggler and
Great
so
Khali.
on. Great Khali's had his run. Big Show, obviously, on and on. And Kane, literally every single guy. I mean, we watched that Battle Royal a couple weeks ago with all those guys in the ring. All of them have had title runs. The thing about Daniel Bryan is he's the complete antithesis of a Vince McMahon, champion. He's kind of like a Bob Backlund. Just to Vince, like he's the complete opposite of what Vince McMahon thinks of as a champion. But the crowd, they have to listen to the crowd, and the crowd loves the guy and his whole story. And what I think they're doing, which I think is a disservice, because I just think they're wasting time. I think they're waiting to give Daniel Bryan this WrestleMania moment. So they're sort of teasing us, getting us there with title reign. Then he's stripped of the title, then another title reign, and he's screwed out of the title again. Now he's off with the Wyatt family. But I think it's all going to cycle back to some kind of WrestleMania moment where we kind of have that sort of Rey Mysterio, Chris Benoit kind of, oh my God, they actually put the title on this guy. And then, like you said, a 2-3 month, 4 month reign until Vince and Hunter get sick of it and go back to Super Cena.
Well, I hope you're right to an extent, although I'd rather have him be booked more like Chris Benoit's world champion as opposed to Rey Mysterio.
Yeah, but, I mean, what can we expect? I mean, all we've seen is him being booked like Rey Mysterio. But to me, I just feel like they're doing themselves such a disservice by not telling the full Daniel Bryan story. I mean, they did it a little bit leading into that Cena match, showing that package where he's being trained by HBK and all that kind of stuff. But like, I want to hear that whole story of him, suffering on the indies and being the indie darling and getting fired by WWF and the WWE and then getting rehired, and tell that story. I mean, any other company, look at what UFC does with their champions and the history packages and the boxing, the HBO 24/7. Like, give me that kind of reality, gritty stuff. But WWE just is not interested in doing that. They did a little bit with CM Punk. They did a little bit with Daniel Bryan, but I just wish they would do it a lot. I want to hear that story.
Well, it looks like they are shifting towards more of a sports approach as opposed to entertainment. Well, they're talking about shifting towards more of a sports approach because, their TV contracts are coming up. They're either going to renew with USA, perhaps they'll go to Viacom, maybe Fox Sports 1. And, of course, with the sports these days, the TV rights fees, they're going up and up and up and up. Do you think they should take more of a sports approach as opposed to an entertainment approach that they've been taking the last maybe 5-10 years now?
Look, I can't say they should stop doing what they're doing. And they're a multi-billion-dollar company. Their bottom line is not suffering. WrestleMania is, I was there the last 3 years. The thing sells out. It's insane. They make a ton of money. They're doing well. Why, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But me, as a wrestling fan, I grew up on the NWA. I grew up on UWF and World Class, and where it felt real. It felt like a sport. It felt like these guys were legitimately, they were legitimately upset with each other, and they had legitimate altercations, and what they were doing in the ring seemed real. And it's always the best thing about wrestling is that line of what's real and what's not. And right now in WWE, I mean, it's like 90%. You just watch it and it's just like a bad it's like a bad kindergarten play. a lot of times. And I just wish they would go back. I wish they would get back, even it out a little more, like maybe 60-40, 50-50 of that like 80s, 90s gritty feel where the line is blurred, like that. They hit on it sometimes, like the CM Punk, pipe bomb and the Mark Henry swerve, retirement swerve, like those kind of things that they dangle that carrot and they do these things and it's like, holy crap, this is going to be great. And then they go right back to the sort of circus, Hollywood, sort of teleplays backstage and contrived plot lines and
Titus O'Neil throwing up.
Yeah, I mean, and what bothers me is like they derail these potentially great storylines. They derailed CM Punk with Kevin Nash, which never got paid off. And then CM Punk obviously went on to do what he did and have the title for, more than a year. But we never got that great CM Punk story. And then flash forward like 2 years later, you get Daniel Bryan, and they derail the whole thing with the Big Show, at which they never paid off because they realized it wasn't working. So, I just feel like they're so obsessed with being an entertainment program that they're forgetting that there's a very active fan base that wants the sort of the line blurred. But they focus towards the kids. The kids buy the merchandise, and they're making the program for the younger fans and to the disservice of the older fans. But I think that's kind of a mistake.
Of course. Now, more on the current product in a second. You yourself got started with WWE back in 2006?
Correct.
Prior to that, you were working in media. Was it always one of your goals to get involved in some capacity in pro wrestling, or were you content just being a hardcore fan?
No way, man. I had no idea that was even an option. I was working on a show called Web Junk 20 on VH1. It was sort of a precursor to Tosh.0, hosted by the late, great Patrice O'Neal, who, by the way, served time as a WWE creative team member, little known fact. Or maybe it's a majorly known fact, I don't know. But anyway, I'm writing on that show. The show comes to an end. I'm on a job website, a media job website, and it says WWE creative team. There was a job posting for a WWE creative position, and I, couldn't believe my eyes that this was actually out. I'm still living thinking, kayfabe, old school wrestling fan. I couldn't believe it, and I went for it. I didn't get it the first time. Waited a year, tried again, and I got it, and they hired me. And there I was, one day I was a wrestling fan, the next day I was literally at the table with Vince McMahon.
That's got to be surreal for you. Now, we hear all the time that they don't like guys with wrestling backgrounds or guys that are actual fans. Did you have to try really hard to hide your fandom, or were they pretty cool with it at first?
It's kind of a misnomer. When you're interviewing, they say things like, you need to know the product. They quiz you, they don't quiz you, but they test you to see if how much of a fan and how much of the product you know about. And you think, oh, it'll be perfect. I've been a fan my entire life. I'll fit right in. Then you get the job, and you get in there, and they really don't want you to be a fan. They want you to be a clean slate that they can mold in their image. They get really excited when you come to the table with all of these TV credits or movie credits, They're like, oh, we hired a guy who was a writer on sitcoms, and we hired a guy who was a writer on soap operas, and this guy's a comedian. And, for me, I came in with a little bit of TV writing experience, a lot of TV production experience. I got into the WWE machine, and they wanted me to dislearn everything I'd learned everywhere else and just learn and operate under the WWE way. Whereas guys who were interns for WWE and moved up through the system to become writers on the creative team, those dudes all lasted 6, 8, 10, 12 years. The Brian Gewirtzes, the Ed Koskis, the David Laganas. Those dudes were all interns, man. They learned the WWE system, and they moved up, and that's why they were successful. Guys like me and Alex Greenfield and and other dudes like that. We came from entertainment, and once we got in there, it was just like they really kind of want you to forget all that.
Yeah. Now, you were there from '06 to '07, correct?
Yeah, early '07, I got fired.
And during that time, it was about a little over a year into the John Cena era. Well, John Cena, Batista era. Of course, Batista later
Yeah,
left wrestling.
By far, Cena was the guy.
What was
Even at that point.
And what was that like? I mean, obviously, I'm sure his work ethic was definitely on display, but what was the atmosphere like backstage? Were people optimistic about the direction? Was it, a little unsure? What was it like?
It was a weird time. I look back at the rosters of both shows. You have to remember the brands had just split, and they added a third brand, the ECW brand. And so talent was stretched thin. There was no developmental system. It was kind of just OVW and Louisville, I think. And there just wasn't that talent pool. And so we were really stretched thin with a lot of sort of WCW guys on their way out, a lot of ECW guys on their way in, but Vince really had no interest in using them or elevating them. He had CM Punk, who everybody knew was a star, but the powers that be were not ready to let him be a star. And you just had a bunch of mid-card guys. There just wasn't a lot to work with when I was there, even though we had guys like Kurt Angle and sort of in his final days as a WWE superstar. But, we had Ken Anderson, and we had MVP, and we had Rey Mysterio, and we had Batista, and we had Booker. It was the King Booker era on SmackDown. And on Raw, you had Rated RKO, and you had Cena, and that was really it. Like that was the top of the card, and everything else was just, the Miz was kind of just starting out. Like there was a huge drop off from the top of the card to the mid card, is what I'm trying to say. So it was an interesting time. There wasn't a lot we were able to do.
Yeah, and you worked with MVP and Ken Anderson in the early days, from what I've read in previous interviews. Does it bother you that those guys never got to that next level of stardom? Because they certainly had the potential.
Yeah, I mean, it stinks. We would sit on the SmackDown team, and we wanted to be a complete independent show, and we had meetings about making Elijah Burke the guy. We had meetings about making MVP the guy, Ken Anderson. And we were just sort of stuck in that Batista, Booker, Cena, Orton, Edge, and that was it. There really was. It was an uphill battle to get anybody else to that level. And I think if you look today, besides Punk and Bryan, it's kind of the same template. It's the same top of the card, and everybody else is fighting for the scraps. I mean, look, Cena got injured this year, and as much as I would never wish an injury upon a guy, especially a guy who works as hard as Cena, I was kind of relieved. I was like, all right, here we go. 6 months without Cena, without the crutch of John Cena. Let's see who steps up. Let's see who elevates to top of the card. And there you go. They brought Cena back within 2 months. It happened when I was there, where the SmackDown only pay-per-views weren't doing well. So what'd they do? They brought Cena over from Raw, and they tagged him with Batista. And, to me, it's just, as a fan, 10 years of John Cena, as much as I respect the guy, I gotta believe even the most true John Cena fans, who are now maybe teenagers, have to be ready for something new.
Yeah, I mean, God bless the guy. I mean, his work ethic is undeniable, and he may not be the best worker in the world, but he's had a lot of great matches. But I think they're even doing him a disservice. I mean, he's got no opponents. There's nobody credible out there. Maybe Daniel Bryan if they build him up correctly, but Why are they so gun-shy as far as building up new top guys? Granted, they're making money, like you said earlier in this interview, but I don't see the UFC going, oh man, we have way too many top stars. Shouldn't that be a good thing for any company, particularly one in combat sports or pro wrestling?
I mean, it's almost it's an old school wrestling mentality. I mean, if you read anything about the territory days, I mean, the promoters would put the title on their children because the only people, or they would either put the titles on themselves or on their offspring or on the one guy in the company they could trust to not leave them high and dry. And even though the world is 100% different now, it's the same thing. John Cena is a rock for Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon knows he can trust John Cena. He knows what he's going to get out of him. He knows he's not going to take his ball and go home like Stone Cold. He knows he's not going to leave for movies like The Rock. He knows that he's not going to get in trouble like Randy Orton. He knows if John Cena is the face of his company, not to use the sort of quote-unquote face of the company plotline that they're using now, if John Cena is the guy, he's a safe pick for the office, just like Bob Backlund back in the 70s was the safe pick to hold the title for 8 years until they found their next guy, which ended up being Hulk Hogan.
Now, were there any ideas that were rejected by Vince McMahon that almost came to fruition that you look back now and say, wow, that could have been awesome or that could have been really, really bad?
I mean, that's the fun part of hanging out with ex-writers. There so many. I mean, the biggest misconception is that the writers are culpable, are just as culpable as Vince. A lot of people go, oh, those writers, they come up with the worst ideas. I mean, the product is so bad. Dude, the writers are just as big of fans as you guys are. And they come up with all the good ideas that are tweeted out and fantasy booked on Twitter. And all those ideas get shot down because the filter, and it's getting better now because at least you have Triple H, who has his own complications as the guy you need to pass ideas through. But when I was there, all our good ideas passed through a man in his 60s who didn't understand, who didn't get the sort of pop culture relevance, or like he just didn't get it. To him, it was, wrestling is done one way, and that's how we would do it. And he would turn down all sorts of good ideas. Off the top of my head, I mean, we had so many good ideas, during DX versus Rated RKO and just fun pop culture-y things to do that just never got off the ground floor.
Wasn't there an idea that you were part of where China was going to be brought back for DX?
I was not part of that idea, but that was always that's sort of a legend. It's always talked about. They wanted, I forget what it was for, but there was always talk of bringing, I think it was during the whole McMahon family buying WCW storyline there, of having China come back and be part of DX. But there's certain things that are never going to happen. That's probably one of them.
Yeah, that is true. Now, they have Dutch Mantell, Zeb Colter, and Paul Heyman under talent contracts, yet to the best of my knowledge, they have not utilized these brilliant wrestling minds creatively. Why is that? I mean, they have these guys under contract. It's not even fair, yet they're not using these guys at all in some type of creative process.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, look, I think if they asked Paul Heyman, he would say no at this point. I don't think, he knows what that job entails and what it's like working with that, hierarchy. And it doesn't work well between, Paul's oil and their, what is it, oil and vinegar? Whatever it is. They don't mix well. Again, Dutch Mantell, fantastic booker. They'd be, it would be great if they did utilize him. But they're, like I said, they're very tuned into Hollywood, writing 6 hours of TV a week, not booking wrestling. They're writing TV shows. They're not booking wrestling events like it was back in the day. But yeah, I would love to leave. I would honestly, and I was one of them, but I would fire all of the creative team members and I would just, let the agents book everything. But they're not going to go back. That's like going back, it's an antiquated system and they're never going to do that.
Is the idea that a lot of writers and people backstage being job scared, is that a misconception, or is that closer to fact?
It's not just the writers. Every single employee of WWE, whether they're on the production or creative team or on the corporate side, every single person in that company is job scared. That whole company is run on fear. And look, it works for Vince, so I can't knock it. I'm just saying it wasn't the most conducive environment for creativity because every single person is job scared. From the wrestlers and the agents all the way down.
So somebody was too scared to tell Vince, hey, the Battleground main event should end in a clean finish?
Yeah. I mean, look, one of my favorite stories is the one that Hunter and Sean tell about when the click was really rolling and they made Vince come to a house show and they pulled him aside and they said, listen, this product sucks, man. They had the balls to pull Vince aside and be like, listen, dude, this product sucks. Give us the ball. Let us do our thing and watch what happens. And Vince, to his credit, did that. And that's basically what started the Attitude Era. But it took something drastic like Sean and Hunter telling the boss that what he was doing sucked. There's not many people in that company right now who are going to sit him down or sit Triple H down and say, look, dude, your product sucks. Because they think what they're doing, they look at their bottom line, and they think what they're doing is they look at their sold out, stadiums for WrestleMania, and they think what they're doing is fantastic. But you and I, as fans, we sit here and we look at all the missed opportunities of, fantastic matches that they've yet to book and fantastic stories that they've yet to write.
Right now, to Vince's credit, he has been able to put personal differences aside to bring guys back. Case in point, Paul Heyman as an on-air talent, bringing in Bruno Sammartino. A lot of credit goes to Triple H for that, but of course, at the end of the day, Vince had to sign off on that to bring Bruno back. Do you think Triple H can do the same when he's fully in control?
Yeah, I mean, I think just as an outsider watching what Triple H has done so far, I mean, not on the creative end, but just on the sort of on developmental and recognizing legends. I look at the history, the world and heavyweight title history package, and look at the focus on, when Bruno was brought back, stuff like that. Like, there's a focus on talking about the history of WWE. When I was there, and I tell this story all the time if you've ever listened to me on podcasts, one of the most frustrating periods of time for me when I was there was when it was, I think, Survivor Series and Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes were on the same team. It was a Legends team. And all of us writers were just like, oh my God, this is a huge momentous occasion. This is the first time Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes, rivals, the biggest rivals of the 80s, are actually on the same side. They're on the same team. This is the first time this is ever happening. We need to mention this. We need to talk about this. We need to focus on this. And Vince told us, God damn it, nobody cares. So at that point, at 2006, and that's all I can speak for, his mindset was, God damn, nobody cares. So now I watch the product and I see, the world title history package, and I see, Bruno coming back, and I see sort of last WrestleMania, the real focus that was put on, the Hall of Fame inductees and Dusty being brought back in the Rhodes brothers storyline. And, I think Triple H has that. He has that love of the game. If you watch his DVD, he's been a fan his entire life. So I'm hoping with him in charge of creative now, there'll be a refocus on the history and on the legends, and not sort of poo-pooing that because they might have to educate their fans a little bit during their 6 hours of programming.
That is true, and he does say the right things, and it seems like he's taking the right approach. But then I see that promo he cut before Hell in a Cell where he told Daniel Bryan he's not a star, and then he buried Chris Jericho, Edge, and RVD for no apparent reason. I mean, there's like it's kind of like Jekyll and Hyde. Like you see him, and he's saying all the right things, but then he does that, and you're like, what is this dude doing?
Well, I'm a little cynical about that. I watched that promo like a lot of people, and I thought it was genius because I thought Triple H was working everybody. Because I think Triple H knows, I think Hunter knows the knocks on him. I think he knows the sort of trope about him that people say he buries guys and this and that. And I think he purposely did that to play up that Triple H persona. But that might be me just, being a little too cynical. I try not to believe that Triple H is that guy, even though I watch things like the Daniel Bryan story being pushed aside for the Big Show, and the CM Punk storyline being pushed aside for Kevin Nash. I kind of want to give him the benefit of the doubt because he is doing some great things with developmental and that kind of stuff. So I kind of think it was like half work, half shoot there on that promo. And like if you talk to Chris Jericho, if you heard his comments, I think he kind of alluded to that. I think he knew that Triple H was just sort of playing into the hand of the internet fans who think that Triple H is that guy, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's some big news on the independent scene. Court Bauer, he is now a part of Ring of Honor and helping them as far as their presentation goes and trying to improve that. What does he bring to the table for Ring of Honor, which has been struggling the last couple of years?
Oh, man, I'm a huge Court fan. Worked with Court, Team SmackDown, and we've actually become closer after working together than we were when we did work together. But he's a great dude, super creative guy, super funny guy, really passionate about the wrestling business, really passionate about wrestling. Knows the business, learned under the learning tree of Gary Hart. When he was running MLW, he brought Gary Hart in, and Gary Hart sort of mentored him, taught him how to book wrestling, how to present wrestling, how to run a wrestling business. And, I think what Court brings to the table is super creative mind, super non-wrestling creative mind in terms of how to market a business in the year 2013, not just, that sort of 20 years ago way of looking at a wrestling company. I think he has a future forward way of looking at wrestling and where wrestling can go in the next 20 years. Kind of like Paul Heyman in that regard. He's got a lot of great ideas, and Ring of Honor is lucky to have him. And I can't wait to see where that company goes under the sort of marketing ideas that Court Bauer has. But he's a good dude.
And he hosts a popular podcast, the MLW podcast, with Conan.
Yeah, they're fantastic.
Yeah, wrestling legend. Excellent podcast. Conan's a brilliant wrestling mind himself. He's talked a lot about AAA coming to the States, being on the El Rey network run by Robert Rodriguez. At this stage of the game, can you see a new promotion that's not named TNA or ROH making a dent on the North American wrestling scene?
I think it'd be hard. But the Mexican style and the Mexican success, the success wrestling has had in Mexico. I mean, it's been tried here. The Lucha, I think MTV2 had a Lucha show, and, it's been tried here, and Lucha stars have been brought into American wrestling companies. But if anybody can do it, it's Conan and his team. But I think it would have to be pretty Americanized. I don't think it can be straight up lucha wrestling, that sort of chain wrestling for 30 minutes. I don't think American fans, we're just not conditioned to watching that. So if you split the difference and have guys like Rey Mysterio who can wrestle both styles, I think it could work. But I think fans my age and maybe, in their 20s and 30s are starved for something new. And hopefully whatever direction Ring of Honor goes into in terms of getting on a bigger platform so more people can watch the fantastic product that they're putting out, and hopefully TNA's new direction. Um, they're slowly but surely getting to a place where you watch Impact and you're not, it's not cringeworthy every single minute. So yeah, I think, like I said, I think wrestling fans are starved for something else, but WWE is just so all over it's just so present. There's so many hours of WWE TV, it's hard to escape it.
And you mentioned TNA, and TNA isn't a bad show at all. More often than not, it's actually pretty easy to watch compared to back in the day, the Vince Russo days. But I feel like there's not that, and I guess you could say the same for WWE to some extent. There's not really that breakthrough guy. I mean, back in the mid-2000s, you had Samoa Joe, catch on fire. You had Kurt Angle, that awesome feud with Joe. You had the X Division. And now those guys are kind of older, and we're kind of waiting for that new guy to come in and capture our imagination. Do you think TNA can turn it around in a sense where they can capture the fans' imagination again and make them really excited for the product, so it's not just a show that people like to watch every now and then, but perhaps won't buy a pay-per-view?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's been their cross to bear for they're like 10 years now. They've been in business. They just haven't developed that breakthrough guy. Even Ring of Honor, look at the guys that they've churned out, who obviously have all gone to, or most have gone to WWE, but TNA just hasn't. They just haven't found that guy. They've been so reliant on the AJ Styles and the Samoa Joes and the guys that they sort of ran into the ground in terms of people caring about them anymore. I mean, we've seen every incarnation of those type of guys. The Bobby Roodes and the James Storms. Those original 6 guys. There just hasn't been another guy who hasn't come from WWE to elevate into that sort of become the face of the company. It's either one of the original 6 or it's been a former WWE guy. And I think it has to be somebody other than those guys. Sorry about that. And that just hasn't happened yet. But hopefully they're getting there. I mean, look, EC3, very entertaining guy. I don't think he's there yet. Obviously, we haven't seen him work too much. There's talk of guys like MVP coming over, and again, that would be a former WWE guy. So I don't know how well. I mean, I think it would do great if a guy like MVP went somewhere like TNA, but I don't think that is necessarily the answer. I think they need to develop a guy, but all those young guys that want to be stars in the wrestling business are looking at the WWE developmental system instead of trying to go work for TNA.
Do you think AJ Styles has wrestled his last match for TNA, or do you think it's all an elaborate work and he's going to eventually be back?
I haven't read a lot of those articles. I obviously have been following. They've spent so much time with these video pieces, showing him wrestling in other companies, which, by the way, is the story they should have done with CM Punk, the WWE I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
When he took the title and ran. They dropped, they went back, they brought him back 2 weeks later and dropped the whole thing. But that being said, I think they've spent too much time, playing out this story. It'd be a shame if they had to drop it because the story was true that his contract is up and it's not renewed. And honestly, I would hope there's a place for a guy like AJ Styles in WWE. But from everything it sounds like, Triple H is saying they're not interested in guys from other companies. They want to develop their own stars. I don't know where a guy like AJ Styles could go. Obviously, he could go to Ring of Honor and tear the house down. But it's a shame. Dudes like that spent their prime in a company like TNA. That guy still has a lot of good matches in him. So if he stays in TNA, I like this incarnation of him. But I'd love to see what the next step is for a guy like him. He's so talented.
Absolutely. Certainly wish him the very best. Now, you were released by WWE in 2007, and you and I know very well, in the media industry, sometimes you don't always know when the next gig is. How long before you were able to bounce back on your feet and rebound from your stint in WWE?
I was lucky, man. It was quick. I got on TRL within a month of being fired from WWE. And that's the thing when I was there. you work so closely with these former, the agents, that the guys like Michael Hayes and stuff like that. And, it was so frustrating watching, you know, just, I just looked at those guys and it was just like, those dudes are so protective of their job, and they'll do sort of anything in terms of like throw you under the bus to make them look good, just to keep, pace and keep that job. Because what's a guy? Michael Hayes has spent his entire adult life in the wrestling business. So where's a guy like that going to go professionally if WWE were to say, wish him well in his future endeavors? A guy like me, not to say I'm better than Michael Hayes at all. I mean, he's a legend in the business. But a guy like me, I spent a cup of coffee in the wrestling business. When it was over for me, whether it was too soon or not, within a month, I went back, to MTV. I got a job on TRL. Worked on TRL for about a year or so, and then that was the next step for me, and I've gone on to do all the stuff I've done since 2007.
And what did you learn in WWE that you were able to use in other gigs?
It's a good question. I mean, I say it a lot of times in these interviews. I got the WWE job way too early in my career. I didn't have the confidence as a TV producer, as a TV writer, in my producing skills to get what I needed out of those guys. And when I left WWE, I sort of realized that, and I really focused on learning how to be a TV producer and how to get what I need out of a piece of talent. And sort of the rest of my career has been, in that mold. I mean, I spent, like I said, I spent 3 years at Spike producing short form programming and working with a lot of different talent, and worked with TNA a little bit, and helped with their rebrand, the whole Wrestling Matters campaign. And, watching me work with those guys at that point in my career, and, putting that next to how I worked with talent in WWE, I mean, I was completely a different person. I had a confidence about me. I knew what I needed, what I didn't need, how to get that out of the piece of talent. And so I think that's the biggest thing. Is it was a big mirror for me to look and be like, why did I get fired? Why didn't it work out? Well, I wasn't experienced enough. I needed that producing experience.
And we certainly appreciate the time. Do you have some time for some viewer questions real fast?
Yeah, of course. Let's do it.
Awesome. All right. Manpreet asks, why are they booking my favorite wrestler, Randy Orton, like hell right now?
I don't understand the question. The guy's the champion of champions. He's the first ever WWE World Heavyweight Champion. I wouldn't say he's being booked as hell. I think he's being booked tremendously well.
I think he's referring to the fact that Orton got knocked out by Big Show, looked like got essentially beaten by Bryan multiple times, even though those wins didn't really count, and then most recently got pedigreed by a semi-retired pro wrestler 6 days before TLC.
Yeah. I will say the thing that a few weeks back in the story, the thing that boggled my mind was watching Triple H spend 5 weeks telling us that Daniel Bryan isn't the guy, and telling us that Randy Orton's the guy. And then they spent like 3 weeks where every week on Raw, Triple H and Stephanie were telling us that maybe Randy Orton isn't the guy. How many of those backstage interactions did they have where they were doubting if Randy Orton is the guy? So me as a fan, all right, well, the faces of the company just told me that Daniel Bryan's not the guy. Now they're telling me that the guy with the title, Randy Orton, isn't the guy. It immediately makes everybody a mid-card guy. And to me, they were doing themselves a disservice. So to Manpreet's question, yeah, I guess they have been, sort of booking Randy Orton as a weak champion. And I think it's just a matter of there's so many hours of WWE programming that eventually everybody's going to lose, everybody's going to win, everybody's going to get knocked out, and everybody's going to hit their finish. from 1 week to the next, there's so many hours to fill. Every possible outcome is going to happen with every wrestler.
All right. Vic asks, obviously you have a background in TV writing and production. What's the best way to break into the TV business?
I could just tell my story. I was lucky. I got into the NBC Page program, which was basically graduate school for television. I mean, I worked with 60 other people just like myself who wanted to work in TV. We worked on TV shows. We gave studio tours. We learned about how television, works. And when that ended, it was a 1-year program. When that ended, it was just like every single person that I was in this program with went to every single TV show in New York and LA, and it was just like that. But the answer I'll give you is just it's really about making those connections and just saying yes to opportunities. If you're just starting out and somebody needs a production assistant, and all that job entails is picking up a van at 5 a.m. and picking up talent and picking up coffee and bagels, and then returning that van at 2 a.m. after the shoot with a giant smile on your face, say yes, accept the measly pay, and ask, when can I do it again? And just, smile, be happy, and, take your lumps. And eventually you're going to meet that person who's going to say, you know what? I think that guy's a hard worker. How about you come over to this show I'm working on? And that's really how it works. I see it time and time again. It worked for me. I PA'd everywhere. I PA'd on hundreds of, tons of shows. And eventually I got bumped to associate producer. And from there I got bumped to writer on a show called Boiling Points. And once I was a writer, I was just like, you know what? I'm a writer. I have writer on my resume. Those are the only jobs I'm going to take. And then I spent, 5-6 years just taking writing jobs. And then that led into actually producing. So it's a long process, but, just be content to start at the bottom, dude.
Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, happy 400th episode of Big Morning Buzz.
Today we celebrate our 400th episode of Big Morning Buzz Live every morning, 10 a.m. on VH1, though we are going away this Friday for about 2 months. We'll be back in March.
Very nice. Now, somebody else asks here, Leon, he asks, what's the best advice you could give me if I want to break into WWE? I'm assuming he's an independent pro wrestler.
Oh, not on the creative side? He wants to wrestle?
Yeah, I guess since you were around wrestlers and you saw kind of like how things worked, backstage, is there any advice you could give him as far as I guess he should maybe carry himself, or as far as his presentation goes?
Yeah, I mean, be respectful and know the history of the business. And get into it for all the right reasons. Don't do it because you want to be a millionaire WWE superstar who wants to eventually be in movies and TV. Get into it because you love wrestling. Otherwise, you're going to take all these bumps and bruises, and it's not going to be worth it. And your passion's not, your heart's not going to be in it. But as Jim Ross always says, get your education first, and then pursue the dream of becoming a wrestler. I agree with that. But respect the business, man. And, read up on there's so many good books out there. Learn about the territories, learn about the legends, learn about what those guys went through. And, focus on being a pro wrestler, not on a sports entertainer.
All right, I swear this is a real question here. At 6414C, could you ask Mr. Goldstein this? My favorite wrestler is JTG. What do you think about him, and do you think WWE will ever push him?
First of all, it's amazing JTG's still with the company. I was there when we got the email about those guys coming up from developmental, and we had a whole email chain about what their names should be, and we generated a whole list. In fact, the name, I wanted to name the tag team the Thugonauts, like Juggernauts, but it was like Thug-O-Nauts, and some people liked that idea. And then there was like this final list of like 6 names, and then all of a sudden Vince told us they were going to be called Crime Time. So they had a nice little run. I liked when they were sort of John Cena's backup, but I guess he's a good hand. That's why they keep him around. But Yeah, I think you should pick a new favorite wrestler.
All right.
Nothing against JTG. He's a nice guy. I'm just saying, when's the last time that guy's been on television?
All right, this is an interesting question. Do you think WWE should do more squash matches because it obviously got Ryback over last year?
I love the squash match era, man. I grew up in the squash match era. It's hard to say. I think, like I said, I mean, I've been harping on it in this interview, but there's so many hours of programming, and every show that WWE produces is main event talent versus main event talent. It's sort of my theory that I've argued with many people that Monday Night Raw, as good as it is and as an institution as it's become, it was actually ruined the wrestling business because it made weekly episodic wrestling. It set the standard. It set the bar too high. It set the standard that every match on television has to be a main event guy versus a main event guy. I don't agree with that. I mean, for 50, 60, 70 years before that, wrestling did very well on television with barely any main event guys versus, with barely any main event matches on television. It was mostly, here's a showcase of wrestler X against, guy you've never heard of, and you get to watch this guy and get excited about when you do finally get to see him wrestle somebody else of his caliber. But again, that's a bygone era. It's not going to happen today. Nobody's going to put 3 hours of squash matches on TV, or even an hour of squash matches on TV. But like the gentleman said, it worked really well with Ryback. And look, look at what TNA's doing with those two, the nerds as they call them. That's super fun. Like, that's new. That's old, but it's new again. It's like that Barry Horowitz give them a couple wins. They're giving these nerds they're pushing these jabronis, and it's actually compelling television. So I think there's definitely stuff that you could work the squash match era back into modern day wrestling. It's just something that isn't done too often, but I think there is. I think he has a point.
Yeah, although if I see 3MB get squashed again, I mean, I like 3MB, but it's like, man, can you find some new job guys?
Well, that's the thing. 3MB is basically the modern day version of the jobber. They're sort of, polished character wrestlers with gimmicks, but they are glorified, locals. They're glorified jabronis.
All right, and okay, we'll get to one last viewer question here before we let everybody know where they can find you. This is actually an interesting question. Any Ric Flair stories since you were employed with WWE when he was still on the active roster?
Yeah, in fact, it's my best story from my time in WWE. It's a hard story to tell on Skype. It's really a story that is only done justice, being face-to-face, but I'll try to tell it as quick as possible and as good. So Rated RKO had a program, had a deal where they were going to beat the crap out of Ric Flair, and they were feuding with DX, and Ric Flair was part of that. And the creative called for Edge was in the ring. Edge cuts a promo, calls out Ric Flair, and Ric Flair doesn't answer his music. So then he calls for Ric Flair again. Ric Flair doesn't answer his music. So Edge throws to his backstage correspondent, Randy Orton, who has caught up with Ric Flair. And then we were going to cut backstage, and Randy Orton was going to be standing over a bloody and beaten Ric Flair. But you never saw Ric Flair get bloody and beaten. That was what we had to produce. So I was assigned to the Ric Flair portion with an agent, Bruce Pritchard. And so like I said, we had to get Ric Flair bloody and beaten for this 10 seconds on camera. But he didn't have to actually get bloody and beaten. So I said, to Bruce, I was like, well, what are we going to do? Is he going to use the fake stuff? And then he was just like, oh, Nature Boy, he only does it for real. So I was just like, okay. So I told Rick, the creative, and he said, all right, well, when we're 5 minutes before the deal, tell me, and I'll get ready. And I said, okay. So 5 minutes comes. I say, Mr. Flair. I was like, we're about 5 minutes out. And he goes, okay. And he literally and if you know Ric Flair, he's always got his fingers taped, and there's the blades in there. And I just say, Mr. Flair, we're ready for it, 5 minutes out. And he goes, okay. And he just looking at me, he just starts going. And blood just starts trickling down his face. He's squeezing blood out of his face. He's cutting himself for no reason. He's not in a match. He's just backstage because we need him to be bloody and beaten on the floor with Randy Orton standing over him. So now we're getting to like 2 minutes, minute 30, minute till we cut to him, and he feels he's not bloody enough. So he flops onto the concrete, and he says, Randy Orton, he goes, Randy, get on top of me. Open me the hardwood. So Randy, again, this is not a match. This is not for anything. Randy just gets on top of him and starts pounding his forehead with his fist just to open up the blood. Randy Orton stands up. Camera cuts to them. Randy Orton cuts his promo. Camera takes Ric Flair bloody and beaten on the concrete floor. They drag him through the curtain, drag him to the ring, put the boots to him. Ric Flair comes back through the curtain. TV goes to commercial. Ric Flair, bloody, beaten mess for no reason, comes up to me and just says, blood, crimson mask, how'd I do? And I said, I was just like, I was just awestruck at that point. I mean, I watched the guy open up his forehead for no reason other than to sell this, backstage vignette.
That's an amazing story.
It's a much better story if you're standing in front of me because I do the whole flop and I do the whole thing. But you get the idea.
Well, when this weather's a little bit better and a little bit warmer in New York, we'll meet up one day and
let's do it, man. It just goes to show you how old school Ric Flair is, man.
There's only one Nature Boy. That's an amazing story. We might as well end it on that high note. Andrew, I thank you so much for the time, man. Pleasure talking to you for this hour. Before we go, where can everybody find you online and on TV?
Yeah, man. Hit me on Twitter at AngeGold, ANGEGOLD. If you tweet me about wrestling, more times than not, I will write you back. I tweet about wrestling on Monday nights, just along with everybody. And then I tweet a lot of jokes and other kinds of stuff too. On Instagram, at Goldstein Andrew. And like I said, my show is 10 a.m. on VH1, Mondays through Friday. You can catch it back on VH1 in March.
Very nice, very nice. And 400 episodes strong.
We did it. Thank you, Fred. I appreciate the time.